Hello guys and welcome to my new video, and today we're going to be looking at update 2 in terms of Mythic Plus tier list for patch 10.2. And I know I missed out on last week's tier list because I was sick. I'm still a little bit sick, but this week I got to test out every single healer when it comes to Mythic Plus. We're going to be looking at the last 2 weeks of healer changes because I want to make sure that people are still informed in terms of what Blizzard is trying to do for certain classes. Before any of these videos, this is what the last week tier list was looking like, or a couple of weeks ago what the tier list was looking like. It's going to change this week based on my testing. Big disclaimer, this is not a meta tier list. It's still too early for that. I still think you have a couple of weeks before the patch is going to be announced, before it's going to be released. Right now, this tier list takes in my enjoyment of each class in terms of how fun it was and how the class was able to carry or perform in these 20 keys where everyone's, again, these are poke keys where there might be a lot of unexpected damage. I'm not trying to emphasize too much on healer damage or healer utility. I will talk about them, but that's not the main focus of this tier list. It's basically my enjoyment and which class was able to carry these lower keys, if you consider 20s and things like that to be lower. But if you like this type of videos, if you like the fact that I'm trying to test every single healer every single week, if I'm not sick, if you enjoy this content, like and subscribe. It really helps out the channel. And let's go and get started with that first healer, and that's going to be Restoration Druid. Now, in terms of Restoration Druid changes in the last 2 weeks, there's not a lot. There's only mana reduction cost to wild growth and regrowth, which is fine. We'll take it because Resto Druids can have mana issues, especially depending on which build you're playing and things like that. There's a lot of healers that can have mana issues because Blizzard rationale in terms of healers is that mana should be a resource, and it's definitely felt when playing certain classes. They reduced some of the mana cost for Restoration Druid. They didn't really do a lot of changes so far. Maybe that's an indication the Resto Druids, or Blizzard feels the Resto Druids in a good spot right now. I don't know, but I've been testing a lot of Resto Druid. I've tested Resto Druid this time around in terms of Mythic Plus. We're doing Warcraft mana, and I tested out multiple different builds. This week, I actually did try that Tree of Life build, and honestly, Tree of Life spawning, again, you will have Scenarios Guidance talent, which will spawn things like Grove Guardians. It felt really nice in terms of the pure HPS that you were able to provide. I would have to say that one of the strongest healers in terms of pure HPS, or how can I put this? If you're doing a hard trash back pull, especially in like Warcraft mana, the corridors and things like that, and you know there's going to be a lot of AoE damage happening, honestly, when you press Tree of Life, and then every 10 seconds you're going to be spawning Grove Guardians. Those Grove Guardians are going to work with your 2-set bonus. You're going to be maintaining Life Blooms, you're going to be getting Clear Casting, you're going to be casting Regrowths. Those Regrowths are going to cast Nourish because of your 4-set bonus, and that's also going to proc your 2-set bonus. It felt like no one could ever die during those situations. In terms of pure HPS and in terms of how it felt carrying the group, it felt really strong. I'm not sure what the best build is going to be for Resto Druid in terms of pure HPS, but Tree of Life felt really nice in terms of what it provided. I was messing around with Flourish, I was messing around with Verdant Infusion, I was doing a bunch of little testing in terms of how much HPS I can provide, but like I said, Tree of Life with Scenarios Guidance, with Grove Guardians, and it just felt like you were invincible, or the whole group was invincible when you had all those things running at the same time. And you have to remember that Grove Guardians, when they fade, they're going to reduce the cooldown of your Tree of Life, which means you can have it more often, or you can plan it a little bit better depending on which dungeon you're doing. So while the carry potential for Resto Druid felt really strong in terms of pure HPS, in terms of trying to maintain or keep your party alive, in terms of damage, I'm not sure what the best build is going to be. I'm saying this every single week because I'm expecting changes, things like that. With Tree of Life, it felt pretty interesting because when you have Tree of Life, especially for something like boss situations, I was, how do I say, instant casting Rat, because Rat was buffed by 90%, including Starfire, so it was a little bit interesting to see me in a Tree of Life form, just instant casting Rats all the time and things like that. I think there's going to be a lot of debate about which is going to be the best DPS build, because there's a lot of things that are changing. For example, they reintroduced Liveliness back in, and honestly, Liveliness is so much better than something like Circle Life and Death. Liveliness has replaced Circle Life and Death. Liveliness does not reduce the duration of your hots and dots like Circle Life did, which means you don't have this forced GCD heavy build where you always have to be pressing buttons. You still want to be pressing buttons, but it's not the same like with Circle Life and Death. I'm not sure what the best DPS talent is going to be. I'm not sure what the emphasis. There is a chance that there might be emphasis on something like Starfire. Maybe there's going to be something different emerging in the next couple of weeks. So that is a big unknown for me. But if you don't care about damage as a healer, you don't even care about this section. The only thing I can tell you right now, if you don't care about damage as a healer, is that Resto Druid's pure HPS, depending on which talent build you run, can be extremely nice in terms of carrying groups, especially if you can make use of the cooldowns, because Grove Guardians have a lot of emphasis in 10.2. A lot of people might say, hey, MadSkillz, but in 10.2 they are nerfing Grove Guardians, but they're actually putting a lot of power into the 2-set bonus. So Grove Guardians are still playing a big important part in your dungeon healing experience, and depending on which build you run, Grove Guardian Nourish is going to be one of your top heals, which is just kind of weird considering that you don't have a whole lot of control. But that is Resto Druid, and I'm still going to be placing Resto Druid in S tier because I'm enjoying Resto Druid, I'm enjoying Grove Guardians. I'm not sure what the best DPS build is going to be, and that is a big unknown. In the footage that you're seeing right now, I'm testing multiple different things in terms of Feral Form, in terms of Moonkin, in terms of Starfire. I'm just basically testing everything at the same time and seeing how that feels in terms of the gameplay. Again, not sure what the best DPS build is, but in terms of HPS, in terms of my enjoyment, in terms of Grove Guardians, in terms of the tier set, I feel like Resto Druid is a very, very solid healer right now. And now let's move on to Preservation Evoker, and the same kind of deal. Not a lot of changes happening in the last 2 weeks. Besides, Fluttering Seedlings no longer occur from Emerald Blossoms, they are triggered from Echo, and Fluttering Seedling healing has been increased by 20%. This seems like a direct change for something like Preservation Evokers in raid environment, because in raids, the 2-set bonus is very strong, and therefore you're going to be getting a lot of Essence Bursts, and you can turn those Essence Bursts into Emerald Blossoms. And based on my, again, I've been doing a lot of log reviews in terms of raids, I can see Preservation Evokers doing quite a lot of HPS with the Emerald Blossoms build because of the 2-set bonus, and this seems like they're trying to do something in terms of that. But in terms of my Metaplus testing for Preservation Evoker, when it comes to Metaplus content, again, doing these keys in terms of Warcraft mana, I actually consider Evoker to be somewhat of a hidden gem. I think Evoker is being hard carried by the 2-set bonus because, like I mentioned, just like in raids, casting your powered abilities is going to be casting Living Flames. There's a cap on this, but Living Flames are going to have a chance of giving you Essence Burst, and then you can turn Essence Burst in multiple different things. So the gameplay is relatively open. I don't know what the best gameplay is going to be. I'm assuming that if you do end up running something like Grace Period, where you want to place reversions on people before damage happens or during the damage kind of moments, you'll want to maybe even hardcast a lot of the time something like Echoes and provide reversions. I'm not sure what Temporal Anomaly is going to kind of sit there because they nerfed Resonating Sphere substantially. So there's still relative unknowns in terms of what the best build is going to be for Evoker. I tried out multiple builds in terms of running Temporal Anomaly, in terms of running Nosdormu's Teachings, in terms of trying more, like, I tried a lot of different builds, and what I kind of come down to the fact is that the 2-set bonus feels really, really strong. Because if you cast something like Spirit Bloom and people are not popped up initially, your Living Flames are going to take care of that missing HP. And I had a blast, honestly. I've been playing Evoker for quite a while, so I knew how to optimize some of the cooldowns. I'm sure if some people are picking up Evoker for the first time, they're not sure about how to optimizing some like Emerald Communion and things like that. Maybe Stasis can be a little bit awkward if you're playing Evoker for the first time, but if you kind of know what you're doing, you can really carry the group in terms of the damage and in terms of the healing. Evoker, in my testing, is one of the top DPS healers when it comes to these large Trashback foes. Honestly, pressing Fire Breath followed by Deep Breath is one of the strongest AoE DPS combos that I've seen out of the healers based on my testing so far. I'm sure there might be a few other combos, but in terms of the simplicity to do damage, when you compare something like Preservation Evoker's DPS rotation to some other healers, it's just mind-blowingly easy, and the amount of damage you provide because of things like your 2-set bonus felt really, really impactful. And because people were commenting last video, and I fully agree with this, is because I was relatively scared about bringing Evoker up in terms of ranking, because if people are looking at this ranking and they're not sure what's happening, because this is not a meta ranking. If this was meta ranking, I would say like, hey, Preservation Evoker's viability in high keys is highly dependent on whether augmentation is going to be mandatory or not. That is just one of the facts that happens in terms of high keys, in terms of trying to get as much utility as possible. But this is not that video. This is all about just doing these 20 keys, just having a good time, carrying dungeons, maybe doing damage when you can. And honestly, Evoker felt like he could provide a lot of good things in terms of the throughput, in terms of the damage, in terms of the healing. And I do think there's a lot of range limitations. Again, a lot of my testing, I didn't really, or I could play around the range limitations, but if you're someone new playing Evoker for the first time, range can be an issue. That's also a big factor. But for me, honestly, I'm going to be placing Evoker somewhere here because I think the throughput, I think you can play around a lot of the limitations of Evoker if you know how to play it. So I think if you're someone who's unsure or who's played Evoker for a long time and you're unsure about what's happening in Season 3, I actually think Evoker is going to sit in a pretty decent spot because I think the 2-set bonus is carrying you a lot, and I think if you know how to play around the range limitations, you're going to have a good time. The only thing that could dethrone you in terms of not getting you invited for high keys is if augmentation is going to be absolutely mandatory. But this is not that video. Preservation Evoker for me is going to jump to A tier because of how it felt when I was testing Mythic Plus. Now, in terms of Mistweaver Monk, there's been quite a few changes happening to Mistweaver Monk in terms of, again, I don't want to go through all the changes here, but they basically tried to fix your 4-set bonus in terms of trying to include more of your healing events into the 4-set bonus. They also tried, or they are changing your healing elixir to be more passive, and they're changing Expel Harm to be an oh crap button. Expel Harm now, a healing increase by just a small 550%. Nothing too big, just a small 550% both in terms of the healing. But you still have to remember, Expel Harm is on the GCD compared to something like Healing Elixir before it got changed. Blizzard is trying to make you or have more reactive abilities in order to prevent or make you feel less squishy. I genuinely believe, and we'll talk about some of the changes to Holy Paladin, because they actually end up nerfing something like Sanctified Plates, and they end up, instead of giving Sanctified Plates to something like Mistweaver, they just nerfed Sanctified Plates. Besides that, we saw some changes in terms of Rising Sunking damage increased by 20%, which is very nice, but they did nerf Enveloping Breath healing is decreased by 20%, and they also nerfed Unison, which is more of a nerf when it comes to raiding situations, but they also increased the survivability of Mistweaver Monk with Calming Presence now reduces damage taken by 6% instead of 3%, which is honestly something that is very welcome towards Mistweaver survivability. I'm still enjoying Mistweaver Monk a lot in terms of Mythic Plus testing because I really like that Phalanx Stomp build. I like Awakened Phalanx. I like multiple different aspects of Mistweaver Monk when it comes to melee healing, because your damage converted to healing, you can really see the difference in terms of moving bars. I like the fact that, again, your tier set bonus are trying to fix a lot of the issues with it. I like that you can have multiple chi harmonies that are procced from your Renewing Mist. You can have multiple of them running on your party, and then you can see your healing really increase. I think there's multiple aspects that make Mistweaver Monk more fun to play every single week. I do think that if you don't enjoy that melee playstyle in terms of Mythic Plus, I'm not sure if there's going to be any other builds viable, because right now Mistweaver Monk in Raid has a very different build that is optimal or viable when you compare it to something like Mythic Plus. But the fact that during these large flashback pulls I can be pressing something like Phalanx Stomp and then spinning Crane Kick, and I'm going to be doing a lot of damage and healing at the same time, feels really impactful. I'm not sure how this is going to translate in hierarchies, but I'm sure you can play around your tier set bonus in order to optimize your healing. I like the fact that you have Vivacious Vivification in terms of instant cast Vivifies, which keeps you in that melee role of instant casts. I really enjoy that playstyle. I do think that a lot of the times, if you can't be in melee, there can be a lot of issues with Mistweaver, and I talked about this every single week. I've been saying this, that I wanted to have an increased melee range to Mistweaver Monk, because I think it would make the playstyle a lot more easier or safer to play. And I still think Mistweaver is lacking some of those big utility items in terms of Bloodlust and Palres, which are a big ifs when you consider Mistweaver's viability for high-end Mythic Plus meta. But this is not a high-end Mythic Plus meta video. This is all about just picking up your Mistweaver and just trying to carry the group. And I think it is, or it does provide a fun gameplay. I think the tier set is very interesting to play around. I think the fact that they're trying to fix the tier set is interesting. But overall, I'm having a lot of fun with Mistweaver Monk. I'm still enjoying that melee playstyle. I think it is a relatively fluid gameplay depending on whether you can be in melee or not. I'm still going to be placing Mistweaver Monk in A tier because I have a lot of fun with them. I still think there could be a lot of things that could be changed to make it a perfect healer. Again, let me know if you would change anything about Mistweaver Monk when it comes to Mythic Plus content. What would it be? But right now, still firmly in that A tier when it comes to Mythic Plus testing. And now let's move on to Holy Paladin, and there's been quite a few changes that happened in the last couple of weeks in terms of Holy Paladin. They have Sanctified Plates is now 40% less effective, which I talked about in the Mistweaver section, because Blizzard has been looking at the tankiness levels of melee healers, because if you're in melee, you tend to want to be a little bit more tanky. So instead, they just end up nerfing Sanctified Plates for Holy Paladin, making them less tanky, which, let me know how I feel about this. Blessing Winter now restores 10% mana over 30 seconds instead of 15%. This is what Blizzard is trying to do for a lot of healers in terms of making mana feel more like a resource, but I completely disagree with mana as a resource for Holy Paladin, because you don't really have these crazy spenders that you can use when you feel like you have too much mana. It feels like when you run out of mana as Holy Paladin, you're just like, what do I do now? Do I just not press my buttons? It just doesn't feel like mana should even be a resource to Holy Paladins, because they just play so differently when compared to other healers. Other healers have these ways of spamming heals in terms of providing as much healing as possible, while Holy Paladin, it feels like, I'm just not sold on it. Let me know how you feel about this in terms of the mana restraints for Holy Paladin. Have you been having mana restraints in Mythic Plus or raiding content? And then they tried to change, or they did change the 2-set bonus. Now, Holy Reverberation healing reduced by 25%. So this is just a nerf to your 2-set bonus in terms of healing, but Holy Reverberation now correctly functions with Mastery. So they made your 2-set scale with Mastery, but they reduced healing by 25%, which I don't know what it turns out in terms of the pure numbers, because your numbers might change depending on how much Mastery you have. Regardless of this, from my testing in terms of Mythic Plus and raids, I still had good value for my 2-set bonus in terms of healing and damage, so I'm not really panicking right now. I don't think the sky is falling. And in terms of the 4-set bonus, they buffed the 4-set bonus. This is one of the first buffs. This is one of the first buffs the Holy Paladins have received. I don't know how long of a time. You have to remember that the Holy Paladins have been getting the nerf bat almost every single week. Now increases haste by 25% for 5 seconds in addition to the current effect. So this is when you use your Daybreak. Considering that the fact that when you use your Daybreak, most of the time you'll be using something like, you'll get the Machine Gun Holy Shock from Rising Sunlight. So you'll be using something like Holy Shock Spender, Holy Shock Spender type of rotation. I don't think this buff is going to be overly groundbreaking, if you know what I mean. Let's go and have a look at my testing in terms of Holy Paladin. So what can I tell you about Holy Paladin? I still think when you're doing Mythic Plus content, when you're trying to carry groups, you're still going to have a good time as Holy Paladin, because it is a healer. This is going to bring a story time for 10.15. When 10.15 happened in terms of the Holy Paladin rework, they changed multiple different things in terms of Holy Paladin providing spot healing, in terms of dealing with multiple different scenarios in Mythic Plus content. Ever since 10.15, Blizzard has been nerfing Holy Paladins almost every single week. And right now, in 10.17, which is the current live patch which you're probably playing right now, Holy Paladin doesn't really provide the most damage. It's been nerfed quite a lot. It doesn't even provide the most HPS. It's been nerfed a lot. But it's still the best Mythic Plus healer, because the design of the class is almost made for Mythic Plus. You still have buttons for almost every single situation. You have damage reduction, you have immunity, you have stuns. You're just a healer that's almost made for this type of content, even though your throughput in terms of all forms of throughput, in terms of healing and damage, it's not the best. So Blizzard has a really hard, they're kind of stuck in this, how do we make Holy Paladin not be mandatory in Mythic Plus content when their class design is made towards Mythic Plus content? And this is why I feel Blizzard is going to have to make some really hard decisions. Do they keep nerfing Holy Paladin every single week to a point that people are going to be like, yeah, Holy Paladin provides a lot of buttons, it provides a lot of spot healing, it does all the things, but it's not worth bringing Holy Paladin because their throughput is just too low, we're just going to bring someone else? Or does Blizzard decide to be like, screw it, we're just going to let Holy Paladin be one of those Mythic Plus healers, one of those healers that just made for Mythic Plus content, and we're just going to be reworking other classes, one class at a time, and making them feel strong. Fast forward to Holy Paladin in terms of 10.2 Mythic Plus testing, and again, you can still have a really good time as Holy Paladin in terms of carrying your Mythic Plus group. You can still provide, a lot of your buttons can be turned or used for DPS or healing, so you have a lot of decisions to make. Do I need to use my Divine Toll for healing, or do I need to use it for DPS? Can I, or for example, I just use my Divine Toll for DPS, but I really need healing for the next couple of seconds, I want to apply Glimmers, you can use something like Daybreak to have a reset. And the same kind of gameplay is still going to persist, or somewhat similar. I do miss Holy Prism actually mattering, because Holy Prism with the old tier set bonus actually did something. I'm not sure what the best talent build is going to be for Holy Paladin and Mythic Plus content in terms of trying to even out some of these issues, and the fact that all the other healers received buffs in terms of single target healing. I do think that Holy Paladin might not have that monopoly, but I'm preparing people for the fact that Holy Paladin could very much be a meta healer coming into Season 3, because let's say, for example, every single healer provides a similar amount of HPS, and Holy Paladin's HPS in 10.2, at least based on raid logs, is pretty decent. I've seen some raid logs where Holy Paladins were doing quite well. So let's assume most of the healers are doing a similar amount of HPS and similar amount of damage. Maybe Holy Paladin a little bit lower, let's assume that. That still puts Holy Paladin in a really good spot in terms of the utility that it provides, in terms of being very strong in organized content. It doesn't mean that Holy Paladin is going to be the best healer to carry groups or unorganized groups, but you still have the utility. And this is why I'm placing Holy Paladin in A tier right now. It's not purely for the meta considerations, but for the fact that you can still provide good healing. You can still have a lot of utility if you know how to make use of it. And to some extent, I'm preparing you for the fact that Holy Paladin can still very much be a meta consideration, so people don't feel really out of loop in terms of, wow, how did Holy Paladin jump from B tier to S tier when it comes to meta? Which could happen. But overall, I still had a good time as Holy Paladin in terms of healing Mythic Plus content or these unorganized bugs. I still think you can carry groups, but we'll have to see in the next couple of weeks how Blizzard is going to approach it. Is Blizzard going to keep nerfing Holy Paladins every single week because of Mythic Plus? And now let's go to Discipline Priest, and Discipline Priest received quite a few changes in the last 2 weeks. Rhapsody now increases the damage of Holy Nova by 10% per stack, used to be 20%, so they're nerfing the damage portion of Holy Nova, and I generally believe this might be a nerf to do with the fact that Discipline Priest damage and like Mythic Plus content, they're probably the kings of DPS. They can provide so much damage, it's actually insane. Or this could also be a nerf towards Holy Nova in terms of raiding environment, in terms of trying to take it out of the raiding ramp rotation. Maybe they want to simplify that as well. I'm not sure if it succeeds, but maybe there's two schools of thought in terms of nerfing your Holy Nova when it comes to Mythic Plus and raids. We'll have to see. Harsh Discipline, honestly, I loved this redesign because they made it a lot less RNG. Harsh Discipline has been redesigned. Power Word Radiance causes your next penance to fire 1 or 2 additional bolts, stacking up to 2 times. Honestly, based on my Mythic Plus testing, a lot of the times I would just be casting something like Power Word Radiance, and then I'll be casting my penance, and it would really, I would see the bar, so the HP bars go up, and that felt like less RNG compared to the previous version. Honestly, a big win in terms of gameplay improvements. I think every single week Blizzard is adding a lot of changes to improve the way that Discipline Priest plays. And then Ultimate Penitence Damage Bolt deals 80% spell power instead of 57, and Healing Bolt heals for 330% spell power instead of 206, which honestly I've been testing. Let's go and talk about Discipline Priest in terms of Mythic Plus testing. I'm generally a person who enjoys the rework right now for Discipline Priest, even though there's a lot of people who might be like, there's so much emphasis on Smite, because Smite, again, for example, your tier set is built around Smite. There's a lot of emphasis in terms of Shadow Covenant and Smite, but I generally kind of like the simplification of Discipline Priest when it comes to Mythic Plus, because you still have quite a few cooldowns depending on which build you're using. You do have more emphasis on Smite, but I don't think that's a deal breaker. A lot of people might be looking at Discipline Priest and they're like, I can't really play without instant cast Power Word Radiance, which I kind of agree. Losing instant cast Power Word Radiance doesn't feel amazing, but given the fact that your setup time in terms of starting DPSing and then healing through DPS is reduced because there's less buttons to press, I don't think having or losing instant cast Power Radiance is going to be a deal breaker. Do I want it to come back? Yes. Do I think it's going to stop me from playing Discipline Priest purely because instant cast Power Radiance is no longer there? No. But honestly, I had a blast with Discipline Priest in terms of trying out this reworked class. You have to remember there's less buttons to press because Mind Blast is going to proc Schism. You have to remember that something like Shadow Fiend or Mindbender is going to activate Shadow Covenant, and you can honestly pick and choose which type of Shadow Covenant you want, whether it's going to be from Shadow Fiend or from something like Mindbender. There's quite a few builds that are kind of floating around in terms of trying to optimize both. I've seen a lot of different builds in raiding situations as well, and there's a lot of positive things that are happening to Discipline Priest every single week. There is still quite a few issues in terms of your talent build being very, very restrictive. I'm not sure what the best build is going to be for Mythic Plus content. I was just trying out things like Ultimate Penitence because it got buffed. I kind of liked what it provided in terms of an oh crap button. I'm not sure what the best build is going to look like in Mythic Plus or what it's going to look like in Raid, but I can tell you right now, I had a lot of fun, even though a lot of people might be like, do you really like so much emphasis on Smite? I'm still going through that honeymoon stage, and I'm hoping that honeymoon stage is going to last for a long time, because I'm going to be placing Discipline Priest in S tier right now, because every single week I'm seeing some positive changes happening to Discipline Priest. I am kind of coping here, but I'm hoping that Blizzard is going to fix some of the issues in terms of talents being somewhat restrictive. I think Blizzard is paying a lot of attention in terms of trying to make this class feel good, and historically speaking, any class that has received some major reworks tends to be quite good in terms of numbers. Right now, Discipline Priest damage is still very strong, even with the Rhapsody nerf. I still think it's one of the top DPS healers if you care about DPS as a healer. In terms of healing, I was having a really good time in terms of these 20 keys. Maybe I'll have a different experience when it comes to really high keys, but right now this is only looking at those plus 20s. So overall, I had a lot of fun with Discipline Priest, and I'm not afraid to say that Discipline Priest is probably going to be the most hyped healer when it comes to 10.2 because of the rework. I also think there's going to be a lot of split opinions about how people feel about the extra emphasis on smite, about the simplification of the class, about the loss of power radiance or instant cast power radiance. There's a lot of things that people might be somewhat unsure about, but overall I think the class is heading in a positive direction, and I'm very hopeful about the future of this spec because Blizzard is paying attention every single week, and I'm hoping that Blizzard is going to fix a lot of these issues. And now let's go to Holy Priest, and honestly the only changes that happened to Holy Priest in the last 2 weeks is this, and you might be reading this and you're like, oh, that's it, what are they doing? The 4 set bonus. Fix an issue that caused the set bonus to activate Sacred Reverence less often than intended. So the initial testing of Holy Priest when it comes to Mythic Plus content is that the tier set bonus was just not proccing, or it had a very low chance of proccing, and therefore it made the tier set feel way less impactful. This change has really increased the proc chance of your tier set bonus, because on average, in terms of my testing, I was able to get something like 60 procs per dungeon, which is insanely high compared to the last couple of first iterations of the tier set. So generally speaking, this change has made your tier set so much more powerful because you can now proc your 4 set bonus a lot more, which means you can use more Holy Word spells. By using more Holy Word spells, you're going to be using or activating more renews because of your 2 set bonus. By having more renews, you're going to be increasing the chance of your 4 set. There is a feedback loop here that can really enhance your playstyle or enhance your numbers as Holy Priest. On top of that, your 4 set bonus also has a mana reduction component to it, which can be helpful because Blizzard is looking at healer mana as a resource. So overall, I've seen a pretty significant increase in terms of your Holy Priest performance when it comes to tier set, because it makes your tier set a lot more usable. In terms of the gameplay, I'm not really sold about Holy Priest gameplay, and this is why Holy Priest right now is placed in a B tier. Again, this list is not looking at meta, this list is not looking at the best healers when it comes to highest content, because that's going to come down later on. I still have couple of negative things in terms of how the gameplay feels for me, because sometimes it might feel a little bit bland. I tried out multiple different builds. I'm not sure what the best build is going to be in terms of which main talents do you pick in terms of something like Light Weaver, Divine Image, or something like Miracle Worker, which is going to be the best way to go in Mythic Plus content in terms of do you play around your tier set bonus. All I can tell you is that the change towards your tier set has made it so much better. Has it made the gameplay more interesting or more interactive? I'm not a huge enjoyer of Holy Priest in terms of what it provides in terms of the gameplay, because I tend to, again, this is just a subjective video. This is all about how I feel about healers. I don't think Holy Priest is all that fun to play. For example, I would much rather play a Discipline Priest and have so much more fun as a Discipline Priest than something like a Holy Priest. But that is a subjective opinion. That is, again, you don't have to agree with this. I generally think I'm going to keep Holy Priest still in the B tier because of how I feel towards the gameplay. For example, there might be some situations where I want to use something like Sanctify in order to provide group healing or in terms of optimizing your 4 set, but people might not be stacked and it can feel a little bit awkward, or there might be situations where shit hits the fan and you need to really focus on healing, but you can't really provide a lot of damage during those situations. And this is a subjective opinion. I personally enjoy healers that can do some sort of healing through damage, and the Holy Priest can fall in some of these situations. If you're looking to play a healer for the first time in Dragonflight, especially in Season 3, I still think Priest is going to be the best option because it provides the best of both worlds. I think Holy Priest is going to be a really nice reactive healer. I think the tier set bonus has been buffed by a lot because of this bug issue. And if you don't want to play Holy Priest, you can play Discipline Priest, which has received an insanely big rework, and you might really like that healing through damage. And now let's go to Restoration Shaman. There's been not a lot of changes, but there's been some impactful changes in terms of chain heal. Healing is increased by 20%, and this kind of indicates that Blizzard is trying to shift a little bit in terms of what it's trying to achieve for Restoration Shaman, because for the people who haven't followed a lot of the changes that happened in 10.2, Resto Shaman chain heal has lost a lot of potential because there's been buffs to your single target heal. There's been nerfs to Resurgence in terms of mana. There's been a lot of shifting away from chain heal in terms of more of this Primordial Wave, Healing Surge, Healing Wave build, depending on which content you're doing in terms of raids on Mythic Plus. And there's been a lot of builds that mainly don't use chain heal at all. Now this change is going to make chain heal a lot more usable depending on which build you're using, depending if you try to go for that chain heal build. But, and that's a big but, the mana constraints can absolutely be there. So in terms of testing Resto Shaman, in terms of multiple different builds, I ran the chain heal build, I ran chain heal talents, I ran a build that didn't use chain heal either. I was trying multiple different builds, trying to find the best build that works for me in terms of these 20 keys, in terms of these unorganized content. And I can tell you, the chain heal build can feel pretty... There can be a lot of mana issues. Even if you're just casting chain heal when you have high tide procs, I still feel mana can be an issue, but it's not that big of a deal in Mythic Plus because you can sit down and drink. But maybe you don't want to bring or slow down your party. Maybe if you're looking to play Resto Shaman in high-end content or really high tyrannical keys, you might end up picking a build that has the least amount of mana issues. So even though they both chain heal, it doesn't mean that chain heal is going to be used. At least I'm not saying which build is going to be the best. I'm just telling you there can be, or you can run into mana issues depending on which build you're running, depending on your stat priority as well. Resto Shaman, for me, I end up using that old build in terms of focusing on Riptide and things like that. I'm not a huge fan of the tier set bonus because I just think it's going to be very, very hard to balance a tier set bonus in Mythic Plus and raids without one or the other feeling somewhat lackluster. For example, I've been running the 2-set bonus and I expect the 2-set bonus to do quite a bit of my overall healing at the end of the dungeon, but that wasn't really the case. I'm not sure if it's because maybe there's not enough healing to be done, maybe that's going to change in higher keys when again there's more damage happening, but overall the 2-set bonus didn't really feel all that impactful. The 4-set bonus, again, there is orangey elements to it, and 5%, I don't know what the true potential or the true value of the 4-set bonus is in Mythic Plus because it's relatively hard to, again, to really min-max or really to find out, but I'm not really fan of the orangey elements of the 4-set bonus. The 2-set bonus wasn't really that strong based on my testing in terms of the 20 keys. Maybe that's going to change in higher content. So I'm not particularly sold on the tier set bonus in terms of the gameplay that it provides. I'll do more testing in terms of trying to see how to optimize it a little bit better. Maybe you have to play towards the tier set bonus a lot more to try to get better value out of it, which might not always be the best gameplay. We've seen that in Season 2 to some extent, but Resto Shaman still provides. Again, in terms of the healing that you can provide, I still think it's strong. In terms of the damage they provide, it felt really strong as well. I do think there can be a bit of a setup time in terms of providing AoE healing if you're running that just Riptide build without chain heal. And because of this, I'm going to be placing Resto Shaman somewhere in the B tier right now because I'm still hopeful about changes happening to the tier set bonus. I'm not sold on the tier set bonus in terms of being tuned properly for raid in Mythic Plus. I talked about this multiple times. I still think Resto Shaman can be fun to play, especially if you like that Riptide emphasis or Riptide build that you might have played something like in Shadowlands. It might bring you some good memories. I'm going to give it a couple of more weeks in terms of trying to see where Blizzard wants Resto Shamans to end up in terms of the gameplay, in terms of the tier set bonus, because right now I could almost place Resto Shaman. It needs more changes because I do think there could be some, I do think it could see some improvements in terms of gameplay. I'm not saying this is going to be the meta ranking because Resto Shaman still provides a lot of things in terms of utility. It can still provide a lot of damage. Its healing still can be very good depending on which build you're running. Your mana might not be an issue depending on which building you're running. You might have a bit more of a setup time in terms of trying to provide AoE healing, but there's a lot of ifs. So Resto Shaman can still perform well depending on which build you're running, but it might not be the most fun gameplay, and that's what I'm trying to say right now, because I think with a couple of additional changes, Shaman could feel a lot more impactful. So when it comes to the summary of the video, this is my tier list based on this week testing. Again, we were testing Warcraft mana in terms of trying to see the numbers in terms of healer HPS, in terms of trying to carry these plus 20 keys. This is not a meta tier list, guys. If you're watching this video, I have to mention this multiple times because a lot of people get confused. My meta tier lists are going to come down in a couple of weeks in terms of trying to see if there's going to be more changes in terms of healers, but overall, in terms of my enjoyment of healers, in terms of how much fun I had with every single healer, and in terms of how each healer felt in these 20 keys that were unorganized, this is my tier list. I think Resto Druid overall, in terms of the pure HPS that you can provide, especially if you're running that Tree of Life. If you have Tree of Life running, if you have Grove Guardian spawning from your Tree of Life, if you also have Grove Guardian stacks, they're going to be proccing your 2-set bonus. It just feels like no one's ever going to die. And I think because you have so much additional healing depending on how you're going to use your cooldowns, because there's more emphasis on Grove Guardians. Again, Grove Guardians was nerfed in 10.2, but the power was brought into something like your 2-set bonus. There's so much passive healing you can do as a Resto Druid that it feels kind of crazy in terms of trying to carry your group. Not sold or not sure about the best DPS for Resto Druid right now, but I'm waiting every single week to see where Blizzard is going to try. Maybe Blizzard is going to add some additional changes because liveliness, talents like liveliness have been added, deleted, and re-added. I'm not sure if Blizzard wants to go with Resto Druid DPS yet, but I like the Grove Guardians. I like the Resto Druid gameplay. I like the hot play style. Overall, it's still going to be S tier healer for me. Discipline Priest has received the biggest rework in terms of classes, but honestly, every single week there's been some positive changes, and that gives me a lot of hope, because I'm hoping that every single week the changes are going to be more positive than negative. And in terms of the gameplay, I've been enjoying the simplified version of Discipline Priest because it's going to be much more approachable to so many other healers. I think so many people that are coming into patch 10.2 are going to be much more drawn towards Discipline Priest because it's easier to play. Because there's so many changes that, again, reduce or remove some of your abilities. I think the fact that Ultimate Penitence is getting buffed every single week could indicate that Ultimate Penitence could be usable in something like Mythic Plus content. That it could be like an oh crap footage that you can have. I don't hate the Smite emphasis. I still go through that honeymoon stage where the class feels very new and things like that, and having Smite as an actual ability to press is, I'm having a lot of fun. And I have a lot of copium in terms of Discipline Priest because every single week there's been some positive changes, and I'm hoping that's going to continue. In terms of Mistweaver Monk, I think Mistweaver Monk is probably the most fun melee healer right now, because if you can stay in melee, if you can use your Phalan Stomp, Awaken Phalan, if you can spin to win, it feels really, really fun and simplistic to some extent. But I also feel that the tier set bonus adds additional complexity in terms of trying to maintain your chi harmonies. And if you have chi harmonies on your allies, your healing, you can really feel the increase in healing because it's extra 50%. So in terms of how to manage your chi harmonies, in terms of how to manage your healing through, or healing through damage, I think Mistweaver Monk feels really fun. I still have the same issues with Mistweaver Monk when it comes to every single week in terms of doing these videos. Increase the range of Mistweaver Monk when it comes to something like Phalan Stomp build. That would just make the class more fun. Again, a big if in terms of adding Bloodlust and Balrez. I'm not sure that's going to happen, but I think Monk is still going to sit, at least in my enjoyment, it sits in A tier. In terms of Preservation of Evoker, honestly, I think it is an underdog healer right now, because based on the logs that I've seen in terms of raids, in terms of Mythic Plus, I think there has been quite a dip in terms of how many healers are playing Evoker right now, because I think a lot of healers are really scared about augmentation becoming a mandatory thing in Mythic Plus content, or even in raids and things like that, and they're being forced to play augmentation. But in terms of what it provides, in terms of the value, in terms of DPS, in terms of healing and things like that, in terms of utility even, I think Preservation of Evoker is still doing really well. I think it's being hard carried by the 2-set bonus, because the additional damage and healing that it provides, it can feel... when I say additional damage and healing, I'm not only talking about the Living Flames. I'm also talking about the fact that those Living Flames are going to give you a chance of getting Essence Burst, and then you can have multiple different ways of spending Essence Burst. In terms of mana constraints, you might not have any mana issues as Preservation of Evoker, because you can use those Essence Bursts in terms of Disintegrate, and with Energy Loop, it can be a pretty nice way of managing your mana. So there's multiple different ways of turning Essence Bursts into something positive, and you get a ton of Essence Bursts because of your 2-set bonus. And again, very few classes in terms of the tier set bonus have received increase to their DPS, and Preservation of Evoker is one of them, because your Fire Breath combo, again, you can just press Fire Breath and you can do so much damage as Evoker, which almost feels like a cheat when you compare it to other healers who have to try so much harder. So this is why I placed Preservation of Evoker a little bit higher from B tier to A tier, because this is not a meta tier list. This is looking at my enjoyment of the class and in terms of how much you can carry a group, and I think Preservation of Evoker is doing pretty well. In terms of Holy Paladin, I talked about Holy Paladin a lot, because this tier list ranking is kind of taking meta a little bit into consideration, because I don't want people to be shocked about my rankings in terms of, hey, Holy Paladin is B tier, but how is it going to be S tier in terms of meta? That could very much likely happen, because at the end of the day, Holy Paladin will have to see, honestly, every single week we'll have to see how Blizzard is going to approach this. Right now, or at least Blizzard has been nerfing or changing Holy Paladin every single week. A lot of times it's going to be negative. Ever since patch 10.15, I think every single week Paladins have just been dreading. They've been dreading changes to Holy Paladins because it's mainly been nerfs. And is Blizzard going to continue with this kind of... Are they going to continue with this kind of mentality? Because Holy Paladin could be a healer that doesn't provide the most damage or the most healing, but it could still be the best Mythic Plus healer because of the utility that it provides and because of the design of the class. The design of the class is almost made for Mythic Plus. Even though other healers are gaining value in terms of single target heals and things like that, you still have to acknowledge Holy Paladin provides a lot of spot healing. You still have to acknowledge it still provides a lot of utility and things like that. I still have fun as Holy Paladin in terms of Mythic Plus content, but I don't feel Holy Paladin in terms of carrying a group is the best healer out there. I definitely think there's going to be healers that are going to be catching up. It'd still be a fun healer, and if this was a meta ranking, it would probably even climb a little higher. But it's not a meta ranking. It's a ranking towards my enjoyment of the class in terms of how much you can carry in terms of these 20 keys, and I had a decent time or a good time with Holy Paladin, but every single week could be a Holy Paladin nerf week. We'll have to see how Holy Paladin is going to... Is Holy Paladin going to stand the test of time? That's what it's going to come down to. In terms of Holy Priest, I said this multiple times, I think Holy Priest gained a lot from the tier set fixes. I think your tier set is going to proc... I don't think, it's 100% right now true. Your tier set is going to proc so much more. There's going to be a lot more healing from your something like renews and things like that. You might not even cast a single renew, but your renew healing from the tier set bonus is going to account for a decent amount of your overall healing. So technically Holy Priest value has increased quite a bit because of the tier set changes. I'm not sure what the best build is going to be, but I think in terms of picking up a healer for the first time, Holy Priest is probably going to be the best option for any new healer or a new beginner healer coming into patch 10.2, because it is, depending on the build, so something like Light Weavers, there's a lot of emphasis on a simple flash heal type of rotation, which is going to resonate for a lot of players. A lot of players just want to click and heal. They don't really care about damage and things like that. But I'm a little bit different. I like to focus on other type of healing and things like that, and Holy Priest doesn't really resonate with me. I still think Holy Priest is going to be a very good choice for anyone who's playing healer for the first time or anyone who's coming back to Season 3. Holy Priest doesn't really resonate with me, and this is a tier list based on the fun of the healers as well, and this is why it falls a little bit. And Resto Shaman, I just feel like the changes to Chain Heal are good. I'm just not sure if that's going to make Chain Heal usable because of the mana constraints, or maybe you just don't want to drink that much in Mythic Plus content and you might just use something else. I still think Resto Shaman, if there was a one healer that I would put for needs more changes, it would probably be Resto Shaman right now, because I'm very unsold about the tier set bonus. I'm still not sold on the Chain Heal build because of the mana constraints. I'm not sure what the best stat priority is going to be. Let's say you don't run the Chain Heal build, what is going to be the best stat priority in order to optimize your tier set bonus? Do you even want to optimize your tier set bonus to something like Mythic Plus content? The tier set bonus, in terms of the 2 set bonus, didn't feel crazy impactful to me, and the 4 set bonus has a lot of RNG aspects. I think Blizzard is going to have a really hard time balancing the tier set bonus for Resto Shamans. Depending on which build you're running, your numbers in terms of damage and healing can be pretty good. I do think that Riptide build in terms of providing, or a build that doesn't use Chain Heal, you can have setup issues. You can feel a little bit like you have to have or spend more GCDs in order to set up for your AoE healing, which can be a little bit awkward in certain cases, and I think the gameplay can feel a little bit clunky. I kind of feel that Resto Shaman is missing something in terms of trying to make it more fun to play, and the tier set bonus could also be changed in order to make it more interesting. So this is why I'm a little bit unsold, and this is my tier list. I know I spend a huge amount of time here talking about every single healer. This is based on the last 2 weeks of changes. There's going to be changes this week as well. If you're watching this video right now, I'm going to try and cover them again for the next video, next Monday or Tuesday. In the next couple of weeks, we're going to be making some predictions in terms of, or we're approaching a point where we might be making some meta predictions. I'm waiting to see how many more healer changes there's going to be, because I definitely saw a little bit of a slowdown in terms of healer changes in the last week or so, but that can change anytime. Guys, let me know how you feel about this video. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, and I'll see you in my next guide.